Hey there, friends. If you're here, buckle up because this is a story about love, loss, and one unforgettable Thanksgiving disaster, or miracle depending on how you look at it. Hit subscribe if you want to hear the whole journey unfold because trust me, by the end of this, your heart will feel like it's been through a roller coaster. Right, let's dive in. My name's Callie Monroe and I'm a single mom living in Portland, Oregon. Yep, the same rainy city where coffee shops outnumber people. Life isn't always easy, but I've got my little sunshine, Ruby, a spunky 7-year-old who loves glitter, dinosaurs, and asking questions that leave me stumped. Like last week, she asked me why clouds don't fall out of the sky. Honestly, I had no idea. But hey, parenting is just winging it with confidence, right? Our apartment is small, like, if you sneeze too hard you might hit the wall, small. But we make it work. Every inch is covered in something handmade. Quilts from thrift stores, paintings Ruby made in art class, which are surprisingly good for a kid obsessed with neon markers, and shelves lined with books we borrow from the library. It's cozy even if it's not perfect. And honestly, it feels like home, until Thanksgiving rolls around. That's when things get complicated. You see, my family is back in Boston and they're what you'd call traditional. Picture white picket fences, Sunday church services, and Thanksgiving dinners so formal you need a seating chart. My mom, Evelyn, is the queen of all things proper. She has an opinion on everything. How to fold napkins, which wine pairs best with turkey, and apparently how I should live my life. See, ever since I became a single mom, Evelyn hasn't exactly been thrilled. To her, I'm a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you stray from the script. So yeah, Thanksgiving at her house. Let's just say it's less Norman Rockwell painting and more battlefield drama. Last Thanksgiving was a nightmare I still wake up sweating over sometimes. The drive to Evelyn's house in Brookline felt like heading into enemy territory. Ruby was bouncing in her seat, excited to see Grandma and Grandpa, while I was mentally rehearsing every polite response I could muster. The moment we walked in, Evelyn greeted us with a tight smile and a side-eye glance at Ruby's mismatched socks. "Callie," she said, her voice clipped, "I thought I told you to dress her nicely." Nice. Ruby looked adorable in my opinion, but apparently, polka dots and stripes don't scream Thanksgiving chic to Evelyn. Dinner was a spectacle of passive-aggressive comments. Richard, my older brother who thinks he's God's gift to humanity, kept talking about his promotion and how he's teaching his kids to invest in stocks. His wife, Penelope, chimed in with tales of their European vacations, complete with photos of their twins posing in front of the Eiffel Tower. Meanwhile, Ruby accidentally knocked over a glass of cranberry juice onto the pristine tablecloth. Chaos erupted. Evelyn gasped like someone had committed a felony, and Penelope gave me a look that screamed, "Control your child." By dessert, I was ready to crawl under the table and hide. When Evelyn suggested we pray before pie, I muttered something about needing fresh air and bolted outside. Standing in the cold November breeze, I promised myself I'd never put Ruby, or myself, through that again. Fast forward to this year and guess what? Evelyn called me last week to deliver some news. Not just news, more like a decree. Apparently, I'm officially uninvited from Thanksgiving dinner. Her exact words were, "Callie, darling, perhaps it's best if you spend the holiday focusing on, well, finding stability for Ruby." Translation: You're ruining our perfect family photo op. I hung up the phone feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. But then, as I watched Ruby coloring at the kitchen table, humming a tune only she knew, I decided I wasn't going to let Evelyn ruin our holiday. Screw tradition, we'd start our own. So I texted Lila, our sweet elderly neighbor who bakes the most amazing pies, and Jake, a fellow single parent whose son Max is Ruby's best friend. Both agreed to join us for a low-key Thanksgiving dinner. No stuffy rules, no judgmental glares, just good food and good company. As I started planning the menu, I stumbled across an old recipe book tucked away in a box of my late grandmother Abigail's belongings. Flipping through the pages, I found a note scribbled next to a recipe for pumpkin mousse pie, for tough times and tender hearts. Something about those words hit me deep. Maybe this pie would be more than dessert. It could be a symbol of hope, resilience, and second chances. Little did I know this pie was about to change everything. When I told Ruby about our alternative Thanksgiving, her eyes lit up like Christmas lights. "We're having our own party?" she asked, bouncing on the couch. "Can we decorate? And can Max come? Oh, and can we make a giant turkey out of mashed potatoes?" I laughed, mostly because I didn't have the heart to tell her we couldn't afford a giant turkey. Instead, I promised her we'd make the apartment look festive, with autumn leaves taped to the walls and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. Ruby immediately declared herself the head of decorations, and started sketching designs for personalized place cards. Watching her scribble away, I felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't the big family Thanksgiving most kids dream of. But then again, maybe it could be better. Maybe it could be ours. That night, as Ruby slept soundly in her bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at Abigail's recipe book. The pumpkin mousse pie seemed simple enough. Pumpkin puree, cream, sugar, spices, but something about it felt daunting. What if I messed it up? What if it tasted awful and ruined the whole meal? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this pie was important. It wasn't just dessert. It was a connection to my grandmother, who had always been kinder and more understanding than Evelyn ever was. The next day, Jake texted me to check in. He's one of those people who radiates calmness, even when life feels like it's falling apart. A widower since his wife passed away 3 years ago, he's raising Max on his own while working as a mechanic. Somehow he manages to keep his sense of humor intact. "I heard you're hosting Thanksgiving," he wrote. "Need any help? Max insists we bring deviled eggs." I smiled at the thought of Max's infamous deviled eggs. They're basically just hard-boiled eggs with way too much mustard, but I appreciated the gesture. When Jake stopped by later that afternoon to drop off a bag of groceries, he noticed the recipe book open on the counter. "Pumpkin mousse pie?" he said, peering over my shoulder. "Sounds fancy. Need a taste tester?" I hesitated. "Actually, I haven't even made it yet. I'm not great at baking." Jake grinned. "Hey, neither am I. That's why Max eats burnt cookies every December. Look, if you need backup, I'm here. Worst case scenario, we'll order pizza." His words eased some of the pressure, but deep down I knew this pie had to work. It wasn't just about impressing my guests. It was about proving to myself that I could handle this. By Wednesday evening, I was knee-deep in flour and regret. Turns out, making pumpkin mousse pie is harder than it looks. The first batch turned into a grainy, lumpy mess that resembled wet sand more than anything edible. Ruby wandered into the kitchen, sniffed the air and wrinkled her nose. "Is that supposed to smell like feet?" "It's fine." I snapped, though I knew she was right. Defeated, I slumped onto a stool and stared at the disaster in front of me. Just as I was about to give up, there was a knock at the door. It was Lila, holding a tray of freshly baked apple turnovers. She took one look at my frazzled expression and burst out laughing. "Oh honey, don't tell me you've been wrestling with that pie all day." I nodded miserably. Lila set the turnovers aside and rolled up her sleeves. "Abigail's recipes are tricky," she said, pulling up a chair. "But they're worth it. Let me show you a trick or two." For the next hour, Lila guided me through the process, sharing stories about Abigail along the way. Apparently, Grandma used to bake these pies during tough times. When money was tight, when storms knocked out power, even when my grandpa got sick. Each pie was a reminder that no matter how hard things got, sweetness could still be found. By the time we finished, the kitchen smelled amazing and I finally had a decent-looking pie chilling in the fridge. Exhausted but hopeful, I thanked Lila and sent her home with a jar of homemade cranberry sauce. Thursday morning dawned cold and gray, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay in bed forever. As I sipped my coffee, Ruby ran into the kitchen clutching her phone. "Mom, Grandma texted me." My stomach dropped. Sure enough, there was a message from Evelyn waiting for me. "Happy little makeshift holiday, Callie. Don't forget to teach Ruby proper manners." I clenched my fist so tightly the mug nearly cracked. How dare she? This wasn't about manners. It was about control. For a moment, I considered canceling everything and spending the day hiding under a blanket. But then Ruby hugged me, her small arms wrapping around my waist. "Don't listen to her, Mommy. Our Thanksgiving is gonna be awesome." Her faith in me was both comforting and terrifying. What if I let her down? What if this whole thing fell apart? Still, I forced a smile and kissed the top of her head. "You're right, kiddo. Let's make today unforgettable." As Ruby skipped off to finish decorating, I pulled out Abigail's recipe book again. Maybe Evelyn was wrong about me. Maybe I wasn't failing at being a mom. I was just doing it my way. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. By mid-afternoon, the apartment was starting to feel like a real Thanksgiving haven. The table was set with mismatched plates and silverware we'd borrowed from Lila, along with Ruby's colorful place cards that read things like, "Max, best boy ever," and Lila, Pie Queen. Fairy lights twinkled above us, casting a warm glow over everything. Jake arrived first, carrying 2 massive Tupperware containers of deviled eggs and homemade stuffing. He also brought a bottle of red wine which he handed to me with a wink. "For emergencies," he said. "You know, in case someone burns the turkey-shaped mashed potatoes." Ruby immediately dragged Max into her room to show him her latest art project, leaving Jake and me alone in the kitchen. As I pulled the pumpkin mousse pie out of the fridge for inspection, Jake leaned against the counter sipping a glass of water. "You nervous?" he asked. I hesitated before nodding. "A little. This is different for me. I've always felt like I'm supposed to prove something to my family, you know? That I can do this single mom thing without screwing it up." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Parenting solo is hard enough without judgmental relatives breathing down your neck. But hey, if anyone deserves a break from all that noise, it's you. And Ruby. She's amazing, by the way." His words caught me off guard. Not because they weren't true, but because hearing them from someone else made them feel real. For so long, I'd been trying to live up to Evelyn's impossible standards, forgetting that Ruby didn't need perfection. She just needed love. As the clock ticked closer to dinner time, doubt began creeping in like an unwelcome guest. What if no one showed up? What if the food was terrible? What if Ruby got bored halfway through and started throwing cranberries at people? To distract myself, I wandered into the living room, where Max and Ruby were sprawled on the floor building a fort out of blankets and pillows. They giggled as they draped a scarf over the coffee table, declaring it their castle. Watching them play together filled me with a mix of pride and sadness. Pride because Ruby was happy, and sadness because I wished Evelyn could see how wonderful she was. Then my phone buzzed. It was Richard sending yet another passive-aggressive text. "Mom says dinner's going great here. Too bad you couldn't make it." I stared at the screen, anger bubbling inside me. Who did he think he was? Did he really believe I cared about his perfect little family portrait? Before I could stop myself, I typed back, "Glad to hear it. Hope everyone enjoys the store-bought pie." Almost instantly, guilt washed over me. Why had I stooped to his level? Wasn't I supposed to rise above this pettiness? Sighing, I shoved the phone into my pocket and went back to the kitchen, determined to focus on the evening ahead. With less than an hour until our guests arrived, panic set in. The pie looked fine. Better than fine, actually, but what if it tasted awful? What if Lila hated it? Or worse, what if Ruby took one bite and declared it disgusting? Just as I was about to lose my mind, there was a knock at the door. It was Lila, holding a tray of buttery dinner rolls and wearing her signature floral apron. Behind her stood Jake, who grinned when he saw me freaking out. "Everything okay?" he teased. "No," I admitted. "The pie might be a disaster. And now I'm questioning literally every decision I've ever made." Lila chuckled and patted my shoulder. "Honey, relax. You're doing great. Besides, even if the pie's terrible, we'll still eat it and pretend it's delicious. That's what family does." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Family. These people, Lila, Jake, Ruby, Max, they weren't related to me by blood, but they felt more like family than Evelyn or Richard ever had. Feeling slightly calmer, I carried the pie to the table and placed it next to the rest of the food. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. We were just sitting down to eat when another knock came at the door. Confused, I opened it to find Evelyn standing there, flanked by Richard, Penelope, and their impeccably dressed twins. My jaw dropped. "What are you doing here?" I blurted, my voice sharper than I intended. Evelyn pursed her lips. "Callie, darling, we were driving home and realized, well, perhaps we made a mistake excluding you and Ruby. We wanted to see how your little gathering turned out." My initial reaction was pure rage. How dare she show up uninvited after banning me from her dinner? But then I noticed something, a hint of vulnerability in Evelyn's eyes. She looked almost nervous. Before I could respond, Ruby appeared beside me, clutching her stuffed dinosaur. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, running forward to hug Evelyn. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Evelyn knelt down and hugged Ruby back, her stiff posture softening. "Hello, sweetheart," she murmured. Jake shot me a questioning look, silently asking if I wanted them to leave. But instead of kicking them out, I stepped aside and gestured toward the table. "You're welcome to join us," I said, surprising even myself. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" I forced a smile. "Of course. There's plenty of food and pie. As they filed inside, I braced myself for whatever chaos might ensue. Little did I know this night was about to change everything. The tension in the room was thicker than Penelope's overpriced perfume. Evelyn scanned our tiny apartment with a critical eye, her lips pursed as if she'd just bitten into something sour. "Cozy," she remarked, though the word dripped with condescension. Ruby, oblivious to the awkwardness, proudly showed off her handmade decorations. "See, Grandma? I made these place cards myself," she chirped, holding up a glitter-covered card that read, "Grandma, best pie eater." Evelyn forced a tight smile. "Very creative, dear." She glanced at me, her tone sharp. "Though perhaps next year we can focus on more refined aesthetics." I clenched my fists under the table but managed to keep my voice steady. "Thanks for the input, Mom. We'll take it under advisement." Penelope chimed in, her saccharine smile doing little to mask her disdain. "Well, isn't this quaint? It's almost like camping indoors." Her twins snickered, clearly trained to follow her lead. Jake leaned forward, his expression calm but firm. "Actually, it's pretty impressive what Callie's put together here. Takes guts to create your own traditions instead of following someone else's rules." Penelope blinked, caught off guard. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Evelyn narrowed her eyes at Jake. For a moment I thought she might snap back, but then Ruby interrupted, plopping down between them with a plate of deviled eggs. "Try these," she said brightly. "Max says they're the best ever." The twins wrinkled their noses, but Evelyn hesitated before taking one. After a cautious bite, she nodded grudgingly. "Not bad," she admitted. "It wasn't much, but it was a start." Dinner began awkwardly, with stiff silences punctuated by the clinking of forks against plates. Max and Ruby chattered animatedly about dinosaurs, blissfully unaware of the tension around them, while Jake tried to lighten the mood with stories about his latest car repairs. At one point, Penelope sniffed and said, "Honestly, I don't know how you manage without proper seating arrangements. There's such a thing as decorum, you know." Before I could respond, Lila piped up. "Oh honey, decorum is overrated. Sometimes life throws curveballs and you've got to roll with it. Right, Callie?" I nodded, grateful for her support. "Exactly. Besides, who needs fancy china when you've got good company?" Penelope huffed but didn't press further. Meanwhile, Richard kept sneaking glances at Jake's homemade stuffing, which smelled incredible. Finally, he caved and asked for seconds, earning a smug grin from Jake. As dessert approached, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The pumpkin mousse pie sat in the center of the table, looking deceptively innocent. Would it pass muster? Or would it confirm Evelyn's worst suspicions about me? When I finally served the pie, slicing it carefully onto mismatched plates, the room fell silent. Everyone watched intently as Evelyn took the first bite. For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of disappointment cross her face, but then something remarkable happened. Her eyes widened and she paused mid-chew. "This?" she murmured, setting her fork down slowly. "This is extraordinary." Everyone froze, stunned. Even Penelope stopped scrolling through her phone to glance up. "It's Grandma Abigail's recipe," I explained, my voice trembling slightly. "She used to make it during tough times, to remind us that sweetness could still be found even when things were hard." Evelyn stared at the pie, her expression softening. "Abigail always had a way with desserts," she said quietly. "I remember the last time she made this. It was after your grandfather passed." She said baking helped her heal. For the first time in years, I saw vulnerability in Evelyn's eyes. It was as if the pie had unlocked a memory she'd buried long ago. A reminder of a woman who had been kinder, gentler, and far less judgmental than the person Evelyn had become. Richard cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Well, it is pretty good," he muttered, taking another bite. Penelope reluctantly agreed, though she tried to hide her enthusiasm behind a sip of wine. The twins, however, dug in enthusiastically, declaring it the best pie ever. After dinner, Evelyn lingered in the kitchen while everyone else moved to the living room. When I joined her, she was staring at the empty pie dish, lost in thought. "I didn't realize," she began, her voice softer than usual, "how difficult it must have been for you, raising Ruby alone. I suppose I let my own fears cloud my judgment." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "Fears?" She sighed, avoiding my gaze. "Of losing you both. Of watching you struggle and not knowing how to help. So I lashed out, criticized instead of supported. And for that I'm sorry. Tears pricked my eyes but I blinked them back. Mom, I get it. You wanted what you thought was best for us. But sometimes love means letting people find their own way. Evelyn nodded, tears glistening in her own eyes. You're right. I see that now. And I want to do better. For you, for Ruby, for all of us. We hugged then, the first real hug we'd shared in years. It wasn't perfect and it didn't erase everything, but it was a beginning. Back in the living room the atmosphere had shifted. Evelyn joined in a game of charades, laughing despite herself as Richard flailed wildly trying to act out turkey. Ruby perched happily on her lap, showing her drawings and asking endless questions. Even Penelope loosened up, admitting grudgingly that our makeshift Thanksgiving had its charm. By the end of the night she even offered to host a family brunch next month, though I suspected Jake's stuffing had something to do with her change of heart. As Evelyn prepared to leave she pulled me aside. Callie, I mean it, I want to be part of your lives. Truly. Perhaps next year we can celebrate together. At your place. I smiled, genuinely touched. I'd like that, Mom. After everyone left, Ruby curled up beside me on the couch, yawning contentedly. That was fun, she said sleepily. Even Grandma liked it. She did, I agreed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. And you know what? So did I. For the first time in years I felt hopeful, not just about Thanksgiving but about the future. Evelyn and I still had work to do, but tonight proved that bridges could be built, wounds could heal, and even the most stubborn hearts could soften. As Ruby drifted off to sleep, I glanced at the empty pie dish and smiled. Abigail's recipe hadn't just brought dessert. It had brought forgiveness, connection, and a new chapter for our family. The days following Thanksgiving felt surreal, like waking up from a dream you weren't sure was real. Evelyn called me the next morning, not to criticize or lecture but simply to say thank you. That pie reminded me of who I used to be, she admitted softly. And who I want to be again, for you and Ruby. It wasn't a perfect apology but it was honest. For the first time in years I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change between us. Ruby, on the other hand, was completely unfazed by the emotional breakthroughs happening around her. To her, having Grandma over had been fun but not unusual. She spent the weekend drawing pictures of our Thanksgiving dinner, including one where Evelyn wore a crown made of pie crust. When I asked why, she shrugged. Because she's the queen of pies now. Meanwhile, Jake stopped by with Max to return the borrowed Tupperware containers. He raised an eyebrow when he saw Evelyn's car parked outside. So, is this becoming a regular thing? I laughed. Maybe. Turns out my mom likes deviled eggs almost as much as your son does. Jake grinned. Well, if she ever wants lessons on how to burn cookies, she knows where to find me. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn surprised everyone, including herself, by showing up at our apartment more often than expected. At first, her visits were awkward. She'd bring elaborate dishes from high-end grocery stores and insist on rearranging my spice rack. But gradually she started loosening up. One Saturday afternoon she even helped Ruby bake chocolate chip cookies, though they ended up slightly burnt and lopsided. You know, Evelyn said as we sat at the kitchen table watching Ruby decorate the cookies with rainbow sprinkles, I think Abigail would have loved this. All of it, the mess, the laughter, the imperfection. Her words caught me off guard but they resonated deeply. It was as if she finally understood that family wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up even when it was messy. Richard and Penelope also began making appearances, though their motives were less sentimental. Richard confessed he missed Max and Ruby's antics, while Penelope admitted, begrudgingly, that Lila's apple turnovers were adequate. Still, their presence added a layer of normalcy I hadn't realized I craved. By December I decided to host a small holiday gathering, a sort of trial run for next year's Thanksgiving. This time, there was no hesitation or guilt about inviting Evelyn and the rest of the crew. Instead, I embraced the chaos, knowing that every family has its quirks. Ruby took charge of decorations again, hanging paper snowflakes from the ceiling and scattering pine cones across the table. Jake brought eggnog spiked with rum, for emergencies, he joked, while Lila arrived with a tray of mince pies. Even Evelyn contributed, surprising us all with a beautifully wrapped gift basket filled with homemade jams and preserves. As we sat around the table playing board games, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come. Sure, there were still moments of tension. Penelope rolled her eyes when Ruby accidentally spilled hot cocoa on the carpet, but they felt manageable now, like ripples instead of tidal waves. At one point, Evelyn leaned over to me and whispered, "You've done well, Callie. Better than I ever gave you credit for." Her words hit me harder than any apology ever could. The new year brought unexpected changes, not just within my family but within myself. With Evelyn's newfound support came opportunities one hadn't anticipated. She introduced me to some of her friends, including a local gallery owner who commissioned me to design flyers and promotional materials for upcoming exhibitions. Suddenly, my freelance career, which had been sputtering along, began gaining traction. Ruby thrived under Evelyn's attention, bonding with her over shared projects like knitting scarves and planting herbs on our tiny balcony. Watching them together filled me with a mix of emotions: gratitude, relief, and a lingering sadness for all the years we'd lost. But I reminded myself that dwelling on the past wouldn't help us move forward. Even Jake noticed a shift in me. "You seem lighter," he said one evening as we sipped coffee on my porch. "Like you're finally letting go of whatever baggage you've been carrying." He was right. For so long I'd defined myself by Evelyn's disapproval, letting it dictate how I parented and lived my life. But now I realized that being a good mom didn't mean being perfect. It meant loving Ruby fiercely even when things got hard. Spring arrived early that year, painting Portland in shades of green and gold. As Ruby and I strolled through the park one sunny afternoon, she tugged at my sleeve and pointed toward a group of kids flying kites. "Can we do that next?" she asked eagerly. "Sure," I replied, smiling. "But only if you promise not to crash into anyone." She giggled, skipping ahead to chase a butterfly. Watching her, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect. We still had bills to pay, chores to tackle, and occasional squabbles with Evelyn, but it was ours. And for the first time, I truly believed that was enough. Later that week, Evelyn invited us to dinner at her house. As we drove through Brookline, I braced myself for nostalgia, or maybe even regret, but neither came. Instead, I felt a quiet confidence, knowing that no matter what happened, Ruby and I had each other. When we walked in, Evelyn greeted us with open arms. The dining room looked different somehow, warmer, brighter, as if the space itself had softened along with its owner. "This seat's for you," Evelyn said, pulling out a chair adorned with one of Ruby's handmade place cards. I smiled, realizing something important. Family isn't about bloodlines or traditions. It's about connection, forgiveness, and the willingness to grow together. Thanksgiving rolled around again, and this time it felt like a celebration, not just of food or family but of how far we'd come. Evelyn hosted the dinner at her house in Brookline, but she let me take the reins on planning and cooking. The table was set with mismatched plates Ruby had decorated, fairy lights strung across the ceiling, and an entire corner dedicated to Ruby's art gallery, showcasing her latest masterpieces. When I walked in carrying Abigail's pumpkin mousse pie, Evelyn beamed. "Ah, the star of the show," she declared, setting it front and center on the dessert table. It was surreal seeing everyone gathered together, Richard cracking jokes instead of critiquing, Penelope laughing without her usual air of superiority, and even Jake and Max joining in as if they'd always been part of the family. Lila sat beside Evelyn, reminiscing about Abigail's baking prowess while sipping mulled cider. As we carved the turkey and passed around dishes, Ruby stood up on her chair to make an announcement. "Thank you for coming to our Thanksgiving," she said proudly. "And thank you, Grandma, for liking my place cards. They're extra sparkly this year." The room erupted in laughter and Evelyn wiped away a tear. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Now can someone please pass the stuffing?" After dinner, Ruby handed me a small wrapped gift. "Open it later," she whispered conspiratorially. Curious, I set it aside until bedtime when I finally unwrapped it alone in my room. Inside was a handmade recipe book bound with twine, its pages filled with colorful drawings and handwritten notes. On the cover, Ruby had scrawled in glitter glue, "Mommy's Happy Recipes." Flipping through the pages, I found recipes for everything from bestest pancakes to super-duper hot cocoa. But it was the final page that brought tears to my eyes. Beneath a drawing of a pumpkin pie, Ruby had written, "To Mommy, who taught me that love is the best ingredient." I hugged the book to my chest, overwhelmed by her thoughtfulness. In that moment I realized something profound. Ruby wasn't just learning from me, I was learning from her too. Her resilience, creativity, and ability to find joy in the little things reminded me what truly mattered. Lying in bed that night, I reflected on the past year. The challenges, the breakthroughs, and the moments of pure gratitude. Life hadn't become easier overnight. There were still tough days, bills to pay, and occasional disagreements with Evelyn. But somehow those struggles felt lighter now, shared among people who cared. Evelyn once told me that family is about showing up, even when it's hard. And she was right. Whether it's Evelyn rolling up her sleeves to help with cleanup, Jake offering words of encouragement during rough patches, or Ruby reminding me to see the beauty in imperfection, these connections have shaped who I am today. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the future, not with fear or uncertainty but with hope. Because no matter what happens next, I know one thing for sure. Love isn't about perfection. It's about piecing together the messy, beautiful fragments of life and calling it home.